Hey everyone, and welcome to Recharge the podcast. I'm David Coe. This is a really special episode for me because my guest today is one of my most valued mentors, a man whose guidance changed the trajectory of my entire career. And bonus, he also wrote the foreword from my book, Recharge. He's the former chairman and CEO of Aetna. He led one of the most dramatic turnarounds in healthcare history, transforming a company from near bankruptcy into a billion-dollar enterprise. He is the pioneer gerontologist who co-authored the book, Successful Aging. So let's recharge with the one and only Dr. Jack Rowe. Hello, everyone, and welcome, Dr. Jack Rowe, to our podcast today.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
I got to tell you, I am so excited for today's podcast. This podcast, as you know, comes from my book, Recharge. You know that well because you were actually in the book, and so you graciously were a large part of that.
Actually read the book.
Thank you so much. Yes, one of many. And so I like to ask all of my guests this question, as you know, is to think about your mental health like a phone battery. And before I begin, I want to ask you, how's your battery and why?
It's good. It's good today. It's Monday. I got restful weekend. I went off and I saw a very good play this weekend at Berkeley Rep, which I always enjoy, my wife and I. And so I'm good. I'm starting the week off pretty high.
All right. That's great to hear. That's great to hear, Dr. Rowe. Well, I don't know if you remember, and I'd love to take our listeners and viewers through this, but do you remember how the two of us actually met?
I think so. I was working at a company called Rowe Health as a board member, actually, and we were seeking a chief operating officer. And Rowe's mission was to try to engage individuals in their healthcare. The problem, I had worked as a senior executive in the healthcare industry, actually as the CEO of what was then the largest health insurance company in the world, and was very experienced with the frustrating aspect that every time we tried to engage people in doing a comprehensive health risk assessment or staying on their meds or staying on their diet or staying on their exercise regimen, that people were falling off. And so we started interviewing people from different walks of life. In comes David. David was from gaming, from Zegna.
Yeah, Zynga. Right? That's right. Zynga, you got it.
And he was a gamification guy, and he was a guy who was an expert in understanding how to grab people and connect them to what they were doing so that they were stuck to it and they would come back to it over and over again. Not so much in our experience with healthcare. So we said, maybe healthcare needs the addition of this kind of expertise. And so that was half the equation. The other half of the equation was trying to convince a very talented, very successful guy in the game industry to give that up and come over to this quasi-struggling healthcare startup. And my message to you, as I recall, if I may, was something about do something more meaningful.
Right. And I remember being very nervous when I walked into that conversation with you. And we had this lovely conversation. And at one point, yes, you did say something about doing something more meaningful. But you also asked me this question about how many people play games every day. And I said, we have 100 million people playing 5 to 10 minutes a day. And you said, based on all your experience in healthcare, if you got 100,000 people to really, truly engage with your health, you could make meaningful change. And that never left me. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And it was a great ride. And Rowe was very successful and continues to be as part of United Healthcare. And is how many people are being served by Raleigh these days?
It was over 48 million, I believe.
It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Uh, just amazing.
Yeah.
That's leverage, the leverage that you have. You know, when I was a physician, it was one-on-one. I
Yeah.
was at the bedside. There was me, there was the patient,
That's right.
maybe the family. But 48 million, not so
Yeah.
much.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, we just talked about how I got into healthcare. How did you get into healthcare?
Well, most physicians tell you that they wanted to be a doctor since they were a child, that they tell you about an illness and a family. It wasn't that way with me. I was interested in science.
Hmm.
I turned into a pre-med in my senior year of college, I think. And in medical school, I wanted to be a medical researcher. And I went to classes and I went to clinics. And then every available minute, I went to the laboratory and did research,
Hmm.
published papers. And I that went well. And after medical school, I did an internship and residency. And I was at Harvard
Mhm.
Medical School,
Mhm.
Boston,
Mhm.
which is very, very strong. You
Mhm.
know, so my colleagues were all very, very good and a great environment to work in. And I got drafted. It was Vietnam era,
Know that.
and the draft agent kind of reviewed my material, and he said, "No, no, we're not sending you to Saigon. This doesn't make any sense. Um, Apply to the National Institutes of Health. You're interested in research. There's a research program. You can go for 2 years. Counts as your military obligation,
Wow.
and you'll be a lieutenant commander in
Hmm.
the public health service." So I went off to NIH and I did that. And to make a long story bearable here, I got assigned to the Gerontology Research
Hmm.
Center, which was studying aging.
Hmm.
And I started thinking back to when I was a resident. There were all these old people and they were being neglected and
Hmm.
nobody thought about them and how they were different from middle-aged
Hmm.
people. And there was no geriatrician on the faculty at
Hmm.
Harvard Medical School.
Hmm.
No geriatrician
Hmm.
on the faculty, Harvard Medical School. So then I was hooked. Then I was hooked because I thought, there's a need for this.
Hmm.
There's a need for research in aging, and there's a need for clinical expertise
Hmm.
in aging. So I went back to Harvard and I became the first geriatrician on the
No, that's
faculty at
amazing.
Harvard.
So here you are as a geriatrician. How do you then go from research in this field to then going into the corporate world?
Well, it was completely unplanned.
Hmm.
I was very happy uh, at Harvard, and I got a call from a person who I had known because I took care of someone in his family. And he was very prominent person, and he was on the board of Mount Sinai in New York City,
Hmm.
which is rather unique because it's a medical school and a hospital,
Hmm.
both, but no university, and
Hmm.
very large hospital in Manhattan. And he said, "How would you like to be the president of Mount Sinai?" And I said, "Well, you know, I've never been a dean. I've never been a hospital director. I'm not even a department chairman. And so I have 23 employees. How many employees does Mount Sinai have?" He said, "Oh, about 45,000. I said, "Well, it sounds like a great challenge. Um, but on the other hand, I've never thought about it, but I do have some ideas about what I think the problems are in
Sure.
healthcare, education, and delivery." So I went down for an interview,
Hmm.
and this fellow, his name was David Hamburg. He was later the president of the National Academy of Sciences, and there was another co-chair of the committee, which is Robert Rubin from Goldman Sachs, who was later Secretary of Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
I was very intimidated
Yeah.
by this. And they interviewed me. And the coolest thing happened, David. You're not going to believe this. So we're in this fancy hotel in New York, and they had a nice dinner in a private room. And then they interviewed me for a couple of hours. What would you do about this? What do you think the problem is about that?
Sure.
Et cetera. And then I go to my room, and I'm getting ready to go to bed, and the phone rings. And it's Dr. Hamburg. And he said, well, we're still here deliberating, and the committee asked me before it got too late to call you and offer you the job.
Absolutely incredible. What I have to say, Jack, is in all my years, I have never heard stories of individuals going from 23 to 45,000. And I know we are speeding through this a little bit, but then, you have a very successful tenure there at Mount Sinai. And then walk us through what happens in 2000 when Aetna comes calling, and they're losing lots of money. And here you are. And once again, you decide to take the call. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, well, I was in my office working alone early, and the phone rings, and it's like 7 o'clock or something like that. Nobody else is there. I pick it up. Dr. Rowe, yes, this is so and so, and I'm from the such and such executive search firm. I said, okay. He's looking for a reference on somebody.
Yeah.
I said, how did you get to me? He said, well, somebody told me that you work really early and work really late, and that if I called early or late, you'd answer the phone because nobody else is there. I said, okay. And he says, how would you like to run Aetna? And as I said, Aetna was the largest health insurance company in the world. So, I mean, Mount Sinai was pretty big, but the budget of Aetna was $2 billion a week,
Wow.
right? And I had never had a for-profit job. So I said to him, what? He said, how would you like to run Aetna? I said, I'm suing Aetna. He said, well, there is that, but you're not alone. And I said, I've never had a for-profit job.
Huh.
I never went to business school. I never had a shareholder. I, you know, I, I'm not even sure what I would do, I said, but I got to tell you, you got a lot of problems with that company.
Hmm.
And you don't understand healthcare, and you don't understand doctors, and you don't understand patients. And that's why you're losing $1 million a day.
Hmm.
And he said, well, do you have some ideas about what we should do? I said, you bet. He said, well, if the chairman of the board met with you and had dinner, would you tell him what he should do?
Hmm.
I said, sure. So I met with this very famous guy, who was chairman of the board, had been president of the New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, et cetera. And I gave him I unloaded on him for a couple of hours about what was wrong with health insurance and Aetna. And he sat there patiently. And then he said, okay, well, we'll do all of that if you come.
Wow.
And we had a great ride, David.
Wow.
We just had a great ride for 6 years.
Can this is so incredible, and I love hearing this because even as we're talking today, as long as I've known you, learning new things. As you sat with the chair in that dinner, can you just walk us through a little bit of the things that you spoke about and, just kind of unloaded as you quote, just as you anything you feel comfortable with sharing?
Yes, I would say that in general, Aetna had a very adversarial approach.
Hmm.
It was all about deny, 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 deny. Their business plan appeared to be deny everything and save expenditures, and
Yeah,
we'll have
absolutely.
more profits. And I tried to convince him that if you are in healthcare, going to war with physicians is a bad strategy.
Hmm.
That you basically have to get on the same side of the table as the physicians. You have to think about ways to engage them, give them incentives to order the right tests, not to order too many tests. And you need to get patients to trust you.
Hmm.
The patients were not trusting health insurance companies at that
Hmm.
point at all. And I was in my mind thinking about what is the diagnosis.
Hmm.
When I was a physician, I was chief of geriatrics at Harvard. I would get called to see a patient, frail, elderly, not doing well. Many consultants had been by. The record was this high, not not responding to anything. Very elusive
Hmm.
diagnosis. And every once in a while, not often, but every once in a while, once a year or so, bam, you'd see the diagnosis.
Hmm.
Maybe something changed that
Hmm.
people missed. I said, I know,
Hmm.
it's this. So I'm talking to these people at Aetna, and I get to talk to a guy who's running a very important part of the healthcare insurance piece. And it's doing terribly.
Hmm.
And it was going downhill for 4 years. And I said to him, how long you been in this job? He said, 4 years. I said, how long you been with Aetna? He said, 25 years. That was the standard answer. Everybody was there, 25 years. I said, well, what did you do before you took this job running this really important part
Yeah.
of healthcare? And he said, I ran property and casualty in the Philippines.
Hmm.
Property
Hmm.
and casualty
Hmm.
in the Philippines. And that was the eureka moment. It was the diagnosis.
Hmm.
They think this is insurance.
Hmm.
They don't understand this is healthcare.
Right. Well, one of the things that we've talked about is that not only did you diagnose it and come back and say, I can fix this, but you got everyone to follow and believe, which is a really hard thing to do with such a large employee base and diverse employee base that you had. And, can you just kind of walk us through? So it goes from one thing from diagnosing the problem, it's another thing to say, okay, now everyone has to follow and everyone has to do it in the right way. How did you get from a leadership? What advice do you have for us in terms of with large groups or just being a leader in general, navigating that transformation?
I did a survey of our employees, and I found that they were scoring very, very low on the pride metric.
Hmm.
They had lost their pride in the institution. They were embarrassed to be working at Aetna, which is being trashed by everybody
Hmm.
and doing so terribly. And I thought to myself, we are going to build this turnaround around pride.
Hmm.
We are going to do the right thing for the right reason. We're going to get people to feel good about coming to work and about what they're doing and how they're helping people. And if I can get every one of the 45,000 or whatever it is, 65,000 employees here to work a little harder every day, we can win this game. And then the next thing I did is I said, I'm going to try to leverage the fact that I'm a physician
Hmm.
and I'm going to have clinical activities.
Hmm.
But the big one, the one that we got the most attention for, and that really invigorated the troops, which is your question,
Sure.
was racial and ethnic disparities.
Hmm.
So I had a friend who was the Surgeon General of the United States, and he was coming out with a report on unequal care, showing that the racial and ethnic disparities that are, prevalent in our society. And I thought, we should do this, do something about this at the same time at Aetna. So I started asking people about what we knew about the different racial groups where they lived and what their medical experience was and the illnesses and. And they said, well, we don't have any information on that. I said, well, why not? And they said, well, we don't ask people what their race is. I said, well, why not? They said, well, we can't do that. I mean, that's the third rail of politics and healthcare. I mean, they're going to think that they're going to be disadvantaged because they're a minority. And so that's very risky. So nobody asked that question. So I said, well, I think we should ask the question. And they're rolling their eyes, oh, here he goes again. I said, I think I would feel better if I knew that we were helping these minorities. Like what? Like what? I said, well, like Vietnamese women are much more likely to get cervical cancer. And so if we know somebody is Vietnamese, we should pay for pap smears for them more frequently so we could detect it early. I mean, this is the kind of stuff,
Yeah.
Somebody from the NAACP said he thought it was a great idea. And we were in every newspaper, and we got $1 zillion worth of free publicity, and our business started to pick up. And our employees started to be proud. And so I think the short answer to how do you engage such a large, disparate organization that's so trampled down is you don't do it from the outside in. You do it from the inside out, and you do it with the employees, and you engage them, and you get them on board, and you make them proud of what they're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for watching this incredible episode with Dr. Jack Rowe. We just wanted to continue this episode because we had so much content to share. So stay tuned for part 2.